It's time to get the story behind the story. Interviews with newsmakers, news breakers, and Vermonters making a difference. WCAX presents 802 News with Mark Johnson. Here's Mark.
Burlington Police Chief Shawn Burke says a lack of accountability is a major factor behind the increase in drug use, theft, violent crime, and other illegal activity in Vermont's largest city. I sat down with the chief in City Hall Park, one of the problem hotspots. Burke was the chief in South Burlington and agreed in March to come back to Burlington, where he previously worked for more than 21 years, because, he said, it's where he's most needed. He's hopeful there are bright days ahead for the city and looks forward to collaborating with state and local leaders to reduce the concerns about safety and crime. Our discussion begins after a word from our sponsor, Red Hen Baking Company. At Red Hen Baking Company, they believe pure, uncomplicated ingredients in the hands of skilled artisans are the building blocks for great food. They're dedicated to creating the best food from the best ingredients. You'll find an ever-changing lineup of delicious pastries, sandwiches, and soups at their beautiful cafe off Route 2 in Middlesex, just off I-89. Their breads are also available in many other locations. Led by owners Randy George and Eliza Kane, Red Hen Baking Company has been on the leading edge of the local food movement since 1999. Let's start with, why did you agree to come back to Burlington?
Yeah, so I spent about 21 years here as a police officer all the way up through the ranks and retired at the rank of deputy chief. And I was the sitting police chief in the city of South Burlington. I'd been there about 7 years. And I began to have discussions with the administration about their need for an interim. And I reflected on everything that the city of Burlington had afforded me and my family and my career, and thought long and hard about why I got into this business, and that's to help people. And it was apparent that Burlington was in dire need of a police chief, and this was an excellent way that I could give back to this community as I approached the end of my municipal police career.
Was it difficult to leave South Burlington? I mean, you had a prime position. I'm sure they must have been unhappy you left.
Yeah, certainly. It was a very difficult decision to make, but again, the call to serve was there. City manager Jesse Baker, outstanding professional. I had a lot of dialogue with her about the decision, and I realized, and we collectively realized, Jesse and I came to this conclusion that that South Burlington was in a place that was ready for transition. Police chiefs generally stay on the job 5 to 7 years. I had been there nearly 7. I had done the things that I had set out to do in that role, but the community is fantastic, community support, and also their desire for me to stay. So it was not an easy decision, but I will say the conditions here in the city of Burlington and what I felt the need to give back to Burlington PD was compelling enough to make me leave. An excellent job.
So you decided to come back. It sounds as though you just felt that your best use as a law enforcement officer could be back here in Burlington. Can you amplify on that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. So anytime that you have leadership that comes from outside an organization, you get a lot of great ideas, but sometimes you get separation from the core tenets. The Burlington Police Department has existed for 160 years. It historically has been a factory of public safety leaders that go on to do amazing things, and it was clear to me that there was a few fractures. One was between the administration here in the city and the sitting police chief, and the other was the police department and the mission, and getting back toward neighborhood policing with the resources, limited resources that we now have. But looking across, and I'll just use officer census as an example, the PD has been hovering in this 60 to 65 sworn officer range for quite some time now, post-2020, and it was really time to drill down on that. And I also saw an opportunity to work and better meld the services that had been built post-2020 with the community support liaisons, relationship with street outreach, the community service officers, which did exist in 2011, but it seemed like a new puzzle to put back together.
You were in South Burlington when the 2020 decision was made. You have almost I think a better perspective being one city out. What was your reaction when that vote came in?
So politically, I was not surprised. Operationally, I was really shocked in terms of how was Burlington going to continue the great work that the PD had always done. There was a strong connection between the department and many of the neighborhoods. I realized that there were incidents that were troublesome that helped really kind of drive the defund movement here in Burlington. But it seemed like all the history and all the capital somehow left the bank rather rapidly. And knowing exactly like how this city needs to be policed, it was not going to be tenable even with a reduction of 30%. And, when I base that upon, when you think about Burlington, it is the major city of the state, although it's a tiny town in comparison to many others. But we have a level 1 trauma center. We have the University of Vermont. We have the premier venue on the waterfront and all the civic activity that goes on in the downtown. The fabric of those spaces being vibrant and vital for that activity is public safety. And we've seen that slip away. And that's not even to mention some of the really fantastic relationships that have been forged in a variety of different neighborhoods. I think of Town the Gown efforts that were largely led by now Commissioner Morrison when she was a lieutenant here with the Burlington Police Department. Other great relationships from the North End, the new North End, old North End, down to the South End, of really being engaged with constituents in executing problem-oriented policing at a very high level. But that is human resource heavy. Now, policing and public safety in general are facing a lot of different challenges related to some behavioral health needs, so the mental health crisis, substance use disorder crisis, and the unhoused crisis is playing out on our city streets. Those have really different demands on the police department. And that is why the city invested in these other entities, community support liaisons, and now simply we have to pay more for the designated agency's street outreach team. So that's all good work, because when police officers were plentiful, we would be assigned to all these tasks that we weren't exactly the right fit for, but we're available 24/7. So we used to complain about it then. Now we have an opportunity to really leverage these social service resources. But despite the investments made thus far, it is very clear in my mind that we need the police department to get back to at least 90 officers in order to really meet what I hear is a strong call from every single MPA in the city: better neighborhood policing.
I remember 25 years ago when it was 95 and maybe even 100 if you included the airport.
Yeah, so our number right now is inclusive of the airport. That is a responsibility that falls upon the Burlington Police Department, and one that we take seriously in meeting those federal mandates. And, when I started, we were about 93 in 1997. There was a buyout in 1998 of city employees, you probably recall. We lost about 18. Police officers, chief down through very, very senior and tenured staff at that time. But, through 99 and 2000, when we would have several hundred applicants a year for the position of police officer, we were able to build back, and we were pretty stable by 2001. But, that there's always some give and take with police officer availability. We also post 9/11, we saw a lot of our officers called up to serve because they served in the National Guard. And now it seems like there's fewer people willing to answer that call. And I know I hear this from not only the National Guard, we definitely see it in policing, and even the fire service is starting to see it in terms of fewer application numbers. In policing, we're starting to see our application numbers go up. But quite frankly, the standards to become a police officer are quite high, and we're screening through that increase of applicants rather rapidly.
Why do you think there are fewer people applying?
So I had a lot of thoughts about what remote work meant, what this new generation of employee had in mind. And when you think about this generation, they want to be appreciated. They definitely want to have work that they can leave their fingerprint on. And to some extent, I believe they want to be part of something bigger, which policing fits into all of those things. But there is a rigid nature of our work environment, and that is we operate 24/7. Doesn't matter if it's a holiday, your birthday, your wedding anniversary, you will work alternative days. And against the backdrop of remote work and other private sector opportunities, I think that's a challenge. And, I think post Ferguson, people really look at policing and understand how tough this work is, what the challenges are, what the critical thinking skills that you need to do this job, and that even when you leverage the best critical thinking, all the technology, all the resources, all of your experience, if the outcome isn't perfect in some group's eyes, it can be really problematic for you.
Remind people what Ferguson was.
So that was really the watershed moment that began police reform across the country in terms of use of force. In 2014, there was a fatal police encounter where the police department killed Michael Brown, and that really erupted that community because they were teetering on the edge where the marginalized community, largely BIPOC community, felt as though they were really being over-policed by the Ferguson, Missouri Police Department. In some research after the fact, it does seem that through traffic fines and other municipal-type ordinances, they were in fact over-policing the community as a revenue generator. And to the point I was making earlier, there was a poor relationship by virtue of that in that community. And once this high-profile police shooting played out, the city erupted, and that was some of the first civil disobedience that we saw about pertaining to a police death. But then they came one after the other after the next across the country, and that's what led to a lot of good reform. And in fact, when Chief Del Pozo signed on with the Burlington Police in 2015, he had his eyes on this national landscape and brought a lot of great training and equipment and ideology around this to the BPD. And we were one of the first test pilot agencies for the Police Executive Research Forum's ICAT program, which is Integrated Communication Assessment, kind of a decision-making model. And that's really proven valuable over time because what it makes officers do is really critical think, what are my options available to resolve this? How do we de-escalate in this moment? And de-escalation is a key theme here because that's not anything that we can take off our belt and just deploy, but rather it's creating distance and by virtue time, and then that allows us to introduce other resources. And predominantly that other resource is active listening and communication to see what can we establish for a dialogue with this person to really kind of slow them down in the moment and figure out how to peacefully resolve a situation. Now, not every situation can play out like that. Oftentimes, police officers will arrive at a scene, very dynamic, the violence has already erupted, and we have to intervene in order to maintain public safety. And again, just back to my point about the critical thinking skills that officers need in this day and age to be able to do this job and have the best possible outcomes, and being comfortable with, despite our best efforts and the best possible outcomes, we will always be criticized.
Yeah, and so that's what you think led to fewer people applying because they were fearful that they would be second-guessed.
Yeah, certainly. And it's not until you actually explore the profession, and I encourage people to do this all the time. I'm constantly recruiting police officers. Check out our website, see kind of what we have going on, do a ride along with our staff, understand organizationally where we are, ask good questions of your host officer about how we contend with these issues. And then I also remind folks that this profession, we've really leaned in on our own personal wellness, and that we are now really a culture that know that it's okay to say, I'm not okay. And we have resources to help you really survive this career because it takes a toll on not only your body but your mind. And everyone's cup holds a few ounces more or less than the next person, and it doesn't really matter that it doesn't really necessarily take a death scene or something else traumatic. It could be just a culmination of events that could really get an officer feeling down. And we have ways to tool officers to think through those things. We really emphasize not only mental well-being but physical well-being. And I feel as though that's one of the best investments that a police department can make, not only to retain current staff, but to recruit new staff in as they recognize how hard the work is.
Did you ever feel that in your 21 years in your previous tour of duty here in Burlington, that mental issue part of it?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, we all go through these things. A couple of things jump off the page. I was about 9 months on the job, and I was involved in an officer-involved shooting incident, and that was a lot to process. Again, you come to the realization that people make decisions, and the police ultimately are always reacting to those decisions. When I was a young father, I was in the detective bureau. I was on call, and I was assigned a SIDS investigation, and for months after that, I drove my wife nuts because I would wake up in the night looking for the baby in the bed. We never co-slept. So these things happen. That was at a time too where you didn't really show your vulnerabilities. Culture has really evolved in a very positive way around that. But I was very, very fortunate to have a few different people in my life, including my wife and my kids, who were very understanding of the demands of this job. My father was a police officer in Poughkeepsie, New York, for over 20 years. So I was able to put it in rational boxes in my mind. But without that support, especially at home, and then from the organization, even though maybe we didn't have the formal wellness plans, I knew that I always worked for people, leaders that cared about us. And that means a lot when you're trying to do this type of work.
Let's talk about culture shift. We're sitting here in the middle of City Hall Park. I'm very curious to hear what you have to say about how Burlington changed from the time you left in 2017, 2018-ish to today. It's a lot different.
In a few different ways. One of the things that's really ramped up in nearly 7, I guess just over 7 years now, is gun violence. And the number of guns that are available in this state is pretty alarming. And I'm a gun owner, a responsible gun owner. But when I hear that people are having their lawfully possessed guns stolen from unlocked cars, that's frustrating, because we know that those guns are then being traded for drugs, in that drug traffickers that are here to profit, these are not drug users, these out-of-state traffickers are here to profit. They're either carrying those guns or quickly bringing those guns back to their home city, where they are going on the criminal market. And that's something that's very frustrating to me. Also, we see a similar trend with youth violence. So we're sitting here in the alleyway where the August 2025 assault that resulted in the murder of a man here that stemmed from a drug dispute that involved a number of juvenile suspects, as well as an out-of-state drug trafficker. And Burlington has had some other similar struggles in the time that I've been away, but these are definitely new issues. And I believe that there's a lot of contributing factors to this, but ultimately, there's no sense of accountability, whether that's from the criminal legal system, or I firmly believe in a lot of our home environments in the parental setting, definitely in our school system. There's no sense of accountability, and until we restore that and really reshape behavioral norms in places like here in City Hall Park, which is very peaceful right now because I'm sitting here in a police uniform, and it's resource intense work that we've really amplified this summer. But we also know, because there is no sense of accountability, that we displace behavior. So when we're able to deploy officers here in City Hall Park, we know that on the ancillary blocks, there are people experiencing the things that had left the park, and whether that's public drinking, public drug use, drug transactions, those things are still occurring. And then the other thing that's really apparent being back here in the Queen City is the number of unhoused individuals that are living here. And I don't have an answer for that, but I will say that as we've put pressure on City Hall Park and some of the trespassing issues on the adjacent commercial properties here, we've displaced a lot of folks that are either camping or rough sleeping from right here in the heart of our city, just over as far as Battery Park alongside our police department. And then we hear from that neighborhood that there's disorder at night, that there's public drinking. And I think that coming out of the pandemic, There's probably some people that ended up in Burlington in search of social services from around the state, because we are a hub for those social services. And Burlington really has always had a proud history of holding those values for the community. But it does feel like it's a little outsized right now, and I don't see an easy answer to toward addressing the behaviors that are negatively affecting the spaces that everyone should be able to use equally. And, when I talked to Mark Redmond from Spectrum, who's a fascinating guy, and he talks about when he took over Spectrum on Pearl Street, how Spectrum kind of had a bad rap in the community because their clients would often be seen on the sidewalk spitting and swearing and staring. And he created a rule that if you did that, you were not eligible for the services of Spectrum. And through that, he's changed the culture of that group of people looking for services. And if you drive by Spectrum now, you don't see that, and we no longer get any complaints at the station about that type of behavior. A block away, we've got the Safe Needle Exchange, and we get a lot of complaints from that neighborhood about the behavior of the people that are just traversing to and from the needle exchange. And we understand as public safety professionals the critical need for folks to have access to clean and safe syringes, but there has to be a fair transaction with the community in order to have that there. So if the clients are not behaving in the neighborhood, is that a police issue, or is that an accountability issue on the designated agency and their clients? I would argue it's the latter, because typically if that disorder or that the clients are creating in the neighborhood, if it's even criminal, it's something that we don't have a lot of resources for, solutions for. Public drug use being one. When a person pushes the plunger of a syringe into their arm, the evidence is gone. So we do have a city ordinance that prohibits public drug use, and we can now begin to use that more effectively. I'm sure you've heard the mayor talk about the city circle. It's an ordinance update. Really what it's doing is reinstating the potential criminal penalties of violating a city ordinance. But it really gives a person that's ticketed for an offense 3 options. You can pay the waiver fine. If you don't want to do that, you can come to City Hall on a Monday and engage in City Circle, which is a restorative process, and satisfy a contract to repair the harm that you've created in the community. Or if you want to ignore both those things, the city attorney's office can file that with the criminal legal system, where ultimately you'll be held accountable there. So, I think that's a good step forward. But then we also have to really contend with, will there be docket space at the courthouse, because we know about the backlog. It's been compounded by a lot of different reasons, but it seems as though that there's insufficient resources to move this docket. And I'm sympathetic to the state attorney in this regard, because I know that she and her chief deputy have spent the entire summer trying Burlington murder and attempted murder cases from 22 and 23. And those are cases that need a trial. And anyone else that is looking for a trial on a lesser crime, there's no room on the docket. So that's adding to the backlog. And it's also a situation where people that have been justice involved for a really long time know, if I don't commit a crime of violence and I show up to court, I can kind of commit any other crime that I want to or need to support my lifestyle, and I'm going to be released, and eventually the plea agreement's going to get a little bit better. And I talk to a lot of people in the community that are justice involved, because I was around for a minute and I've got a decent relationship, and they're not bashful about telling me their outlook on the criminal legal system and its efficacy.
The state's attorney, Sarah George, I think does get a lot of criticism in this whole mix. So it doesn't sound to me as though you think that's justified or fair. Or what do you think?
No, so Sarah and I definitely differ on a few of her policies, which is fine, and that's her job and that's her expertise. But I also appreciate how she steps up and works with our team, and I've really liked building or kind of rebuilding the connection with their their office, because we need them in order to bring people to justice for the crime victims that we work on behalf of. So like I remind the police officers all the time, our job is public safety. We wade in to disorder and violence, keep everyone safe, determine what criminal or what crimes potentially have occurred, collect the evidence, and prepare that evidence and present it to the prosecutor's office. And then Sarah makes those decisions on the crimes which to charge. And we need to make sure that we're doing our part in presenting the best possible case for her office to prosecute. After that decision is made, the ball is in the state attorney's court, and now they have to prioritize amongst thousands of cases of what they're going to do. And I don't envy that position whatsoever, and I don't believe that any one person or policy created this. But I will say that a lot of the behavior that we see with consistent or persistent violations of conditions of release and lack of accountability can be traced back to when those laws were changed in 2018. And there's simply less tools that the bench has in their toolbox in order to address behavior. And it's shocking to me that a person can be arrested time and time again for a crime like violation of conditions of release. So that's outright contempt of the bench. And there's no way, unless it's a crime of violence, to hold them pre-trial. It's not logical to me, and it's certainly not having the deterrent effect that we need it to have to keep the community safe for everybody.
When you say you've rebuilt the relationship, what do you mean by rebuild?
It's not lost on anyone that the relationship between even the mayor's office and the former chief and with the state attorney and the former chief, those were not healthy. And I think that's why particularly the mayor began to talk to me about coming back here. The mayor was very, very compelling in her position on she wanted to understand policing. She wanted a public safety advisor. She wanted to have a professional relationship built on trust. And that's all the tenets of being a police officer. And Sarah, I've worked with for her whole career as a prosecutor. I don't exactly remember when she became a deputy state attorney. I always found her to be very hardworking, very knowledgeable, and a person that you can have a conversation with. And then you may not always see eye to eye, but you understand the decisions that she's made and respect her authority in that arena, and then get back to work in policing and not hold a grudge in that regard, and certainly not have a grudge trickle down into your rank and file officers where they feel as though that there's one single person that's a problem. I mean, thinking back over, I just started my 32nd year of policing in Vermont. I can't really think of a time where I ever thought or felt that the criminal legal system was perfectly operating. Right? So again, remember what our lane is. Stay in that lane, do the best possible job to keep people safe, have great relationships with the community, and also deliver to our partner agencies like the state attorney's office so they can take the best shot at finding justice for crime victims.
If you could wave your magic wand, what would be the one change you'd make in that area?
In the criminal legal system, if we could, the one thing would be the backlog. If we could address the backlog and increase throughput, I think we'd have a better deterrent effect, because what we know about deterring crime is a person has to fear being caught for their crime, and there has to be some type of swift, meaningful intervention in a timely manner. We don't have that right now.
I'm not looking and asking this question for you to be critical of John Murad, but how are you doing policing and law enforcement here in Burlington different than him?
So I never worked with Chief Murad. I have a ton of respect for him and also admiration for how he persevered through a very tough political climate that no longer exists here. So I think...
What do you mean by that?
When you think about 2020, that decision to defund, kind of what was going on at the city council, what was going on in the community, it went so far as to have an encampment alongside the police department, which, growing up in the BPD that I grew up in, there was a lot of trust in the police department. There was great community relationships. That level of adversity is nothing that I ever faced. And I admire him for leading the police department through those challenges. In terms of what are we doing a little different right now, we're using our discretionary time more to be out of our cars in these civic spaces where we know we're going to have a host of challenges. But more importantly, it gives officers and members of the public the opportunity to connect and have a relationship. I can't tell you how many times that I get stopped on the street or in the park and a member of the public just says thank you. And that means a lot to our police department. And the officers really enjoy, that type of feedback because intrinsically we all get in this work to help people.
I think that's true. And I think a lot of people feel that people that work here in Burlington, there's so many police departments right now looking for officers. And it's a lot easier working in Williston or maybe even South Burlington than it is here. Maybe it's less challenging. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Oh, certainly. I mean, I know it's less challenging. I've been back here in Burlington for 6 months. We've had more happen in the last 6 months than I had in the 7 years in South Burlington. But this is the policing that Burlington typically delivers. And if you like grit in your work and you really want a challenge, there's only one place in the state of Vermont to work, and that's for the Burlington Police. It's unique, but it is the most rewarding policing an individual could experience.
That is a heck of a statement.
Well, it's the truth. I mean, I'm now well over 20 I just teetered over 22 total years of policing in this city, and it's exciting. And when you choose this to be your life's work and you want to be in it, where you're really, making critical decisions, serving a community with the highest expectations, with the largest municipal police department, with all the entities that you can imagine under one roof, I couldn't imagine working anywhere else.
The increase in drug use, maybe this is too philosophical a question for somebody in law enforcement, but what do you think is going on that has led to this increase in opioids, fentanyl, meth?
Well, it's
and I didn't mean that question in an insulting way.
No, totally understand. It's really not philosophical when you think about the composition of the drug stream. So fentanyl is simply cheaper than heroin. So drug trafficking organizations quickly realize, we can buy a kilo of fentanyl on the dark web for $10,000. A kilo of heroin is $32,000. These are excellent business people in the drug business. So, what's tragic is now fentanyl has not only slipped into the heroin supply, but also the cocaine supply. And when you think about our fatal overdose rates, really predicated on the presence of fentanyl. Now, xylazine is a little different actor on the stage that's come in, and we see some different behaviors with that, but we also see tremendous health implications. People that have gaping open sores on their body, it's really, really troubling. And what we see is second and third order effects there. Methamphetamine has typically not been around in Vermont, but now it's becoming a little more prevalent. And, there's still decent data to suggest that stimulants are kind of a drug of choice here, not just in Burlington, but in Vermont in general. And in terms of why the drug problem here is so persistent, there's no heroin made here. There's no xylazine made here in the state of Vermont. There's no fentanyl made here. It's all trafficked in by drug trafficking organizations that make money, and the drugs sell for such a higher price here in Burlington than in whatever you name the source city, in New York, Mass, Philly, you name it. It's just basic business, and it's worth the risk of trafficking it here. And time again, even I think back to my time that I spent with the Burlington Drug Unit in the early 2000s, we were doing the same types of cases with folks from the same neighborhoods then that we are now. So I think if we could ever get a little break in the action, and maybe someone in this country could think about a plan or an education platform for better prevention, that would be a good start. But we also have to acknowledge really the public health implications of this crisis that we're in now. And it kind of loops back to why we have the concentration of social services here in Burlington, is that there has been that reckoning, but ultimately there isn't the level of accountability needed to keep people engaged with the services, respecting our societal norms here in Burlington, and that's what's really eroding at the feel downtown.
You mentioned Jen Morrison before, who was the interim chief here for a while, and her recent public comments talking about safety issues here in Burlington. How did you react to that?
I have immense respect for Commissioner Morrison, and she has a ton of experience here in Burlington and now at the state level. And, I heard those comments, and I realized that as a practitioner, sometimes you can get a little tone deaf, if you will, to what's around you. What I'm comfortable with in terms of bringing my wife and my mother down to Lunig's for my birthday at the end of June. My mother cringed a little bit walking down College Street, but she feels fine when I say, "Mom, it's fine," right? It's fine.
Well, especially with you.
So, but not everyone, right, is a law enforcement officer. Not everyone is engaging with this population in the park and have relationships with them, for lack of a better terms. And I understand why folks are concerned, in terms of some of what was going on between, the governor and the reporter that day. I think that was in response to some comment made by the mayor. And in that regard, the police are not political. And, I stay out of the political fray, and I remind our officers that we are above the political fray. Although I work for the mayor, we have autonomy in our operational decisions, and we need to be completely objective in that regard. So I'm looking forward to working with Commissioner Morrison in both the city administration and ultimately the state administration on a slate of recommendations that are going to be made very soon. And how can the BPD fit into that equation, maybe rethink a few things. I'm open to whatever's on the slate in order to bring a sense of, a better sense of safety here, particularly in the downtown. When you look across the city, we see, something that's a little entertaining to me. Like when I first became a Burlington cop, the mantra was always, never go to North Street. You're never safe on North Street. Now no one talks about North Street. And that neighborhood has gentrified nicely. And it's a really vibrant little community over there. And I hope that we can do the same here in the downtown and restore this crown jewel to what it once was. But again, I come back to we need greater accountability because we need to change behaviors down here. And I think the first part of your question was like, how did Burlington kind of slip into this? I think we've, as a society, became very permissive, and a lot of behavior went unchecked. And now we just need to really kind of look back at not only what laws can be enforced, what ordinances can be enforced, but how else can we influence human behavior so we can have shared respectful use of places like City Hall Park and the Marketplace.
When you listed a pretty wide group of everything from the family to schools to law enforcement, I mean, it was quite a smorgasbord of places you felt needed better accountability. So tell me more, like what's within your control, where you would see to step that up, and just got a nice whiff of weed.
Yeah. So, and when we talk about how permissive society's gotten, the legalization of marijuana, that was not a great idea, right? And now we have to remind people, oh, you can't smoke in the park. Oh, it's just pot. Well, you can't smoke even a tobacco cigarette in the park. And you certainly cannot smoke marijuana in public settings. And it's just like with open containers. Like you cannot drink alcohol in the park. And it's a daily occurrence that we need to do this. So where do we need greater accountability? In that. So right now, if I were to issue someone a ticket for either that marijuana or the open container that is over here on the bench, they could literally throw it out and there's zero consequence. So then that's why the administration advanced the notion of city circle in concert with criminal penalties for ignoring the city ordinances. The bicyclist just went by us as we're sitting here. That's prohibited in the park and prohibited on the marketplace. It went so long not being enforced that everyone has forgotten. And you may say, like, oh, well, biking on the marketplace, why is that a big deal? Well, it's certainly a big deal when an e-bike comes ripping down Church Street when it has a bunch of pedestrians on it. So, again, that's the job of the police, is to get out there and remind folks of these ordinances. And we can remind them like I do, or we can issue tickets, but the tickets ultimately need to hold the person accountable, that system. And then back to the criminal legal system, when we arrest you for your 10th or 12th retail theft or your 5th or 6th violations of conditions of release, something needs to happen. There needs to be an intervention. Otherwise, it's all for naught.
How did you see the open container when you're looking at me and it was behind you?
So, every once in a while you look around. And, it's like being a parent. Maybe you've got eyes in the back of your head.
Yeah, it's called being 360.
Well, it's a responsibility of any police officer when you're in the field to understand your surroundings. Like, we're engaged in a pretty in-depth conversation, but I also realize that I'm sitting here as the police chief. Everyone knows that, and there's a responsibility that comes with that, and there's also an opportunity that when we're done with this, I'll go remind folks that I did see that, and you're no longer welcome in the park for the balance of the day, because that's what the ordinance provides for.
You mentioned the what was going on between the city and the state, and the mayor was essentially saying that she didn't feel that the state had stepped up and was doing enough to help Burlington. What do you want from the state?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that we could rekindle. I'm particularly interested in forging or recreating the relationship with the Department of Corrections, because there's a lot of people that live in the community under their supervision, and there's accountability measures that we can leverage rather quickly there, in terms of, like, if you've got an alcohol condition and you're on furlough, the Department of Corrections, we should be able to contact them, and they should be able to say that person needs to come back to the jail on a sanction. I'd like to see measures like that, because that's instant accountability. I'd like to see the backlog addressed at the state courthouse, and personally, this is not in the professionally, I'll say, not personally, not necessarily on the mayor's slate, but this conundrum with violations of conditions of release and the bail law structure needs to be evaluated. It should not necessitate a crime of violence in order for the court to impose a bail or have the ability to remove a defendant from the community who is completely non-compliant with orders of the court.
What about the retailers just around the corner here who are, there's a whole more than 100 signed a petition. They're very concerned about lack of accountability, more enforcement. What's the message you've been giving them?
Yeah, certainly. So enforcement it's not a lack of enforcement. Our data has been strong to show that, one, our presence in the downtown has been exponentially greater than any previous year, and our arrests are exponentially greater than in previous years. But it goes back to that accountability piece. We're arresting the same people over and over again for crimes like retail theft, and I understand their frustration. And I also understand how this public safety perception and also reality of downtown Burlington, and then the construction that was necessary for the development in downtown Burlington just hit a terrible intersection. But now that we're sitting in Main Street is opening before us, and behind us are City Place Towers, one of which the AC Hotel had a soft opening today. I do believe that once those buildings are completely inhabited by residents, and that there's a better traffic pattern downtown, that new life, if you will really shape what this commercial sector is going to look like. And anytime that you can introduce people and vibrancy into an urban scape, nefarious conduct goes elsewhere.
The governor has now twice rejected this idea that's been passed by the legislature of disallowing guns in bars. Would that make a difference?
I think it could be an effective tool for bar owners, especially down here when you think about the nightlife corridor, the Church and Main, the few bars that are off a block or two. And it's not lost on any of us that have done this job here in Burlington that we've had a very persistent issue of gun violence related to that nightlife, and that if club owners were empowered to say guns are prohibited here and actually screen people at the door, I do believe that would help in that condition. And again, like, I'm a gun owner, a responsible gun owner, and what we see down here are not necessarily responsible gun owners. And I also understand the logic that a lot of the people that are involved in these acts of gun violence aren't following any laws. So why would they follow this one? I think it's less about that and more about empowering bar owners to keep themselves and their patrons safe, and to, run their clubs in a way that's backed up by an ordinance, as opposed to just a one bar policy where they could be singled out, lose business to their neighbor, or be singled out, by the organizations that are very concerned about increased gun regulation in this state.
What can be done about this youth, the youths that are sort of what I would call, for lack of a better term, kind of wilding downtown? I mean, talk about a group that you can barely keep accountable because of their age. What can you do about that?
Yeah, so we've been leaning in on the regulatory side of that. So each bar has not only a liquor license issued by the state, but there's an entertainment permit issued by the city. And it's up to the bar owners, by virtue of their staff, to adequately screen their patrons every night for their age and intoxication, and then also monitor over service. And when I was back from 12 to about 2015, I was the lieutenant in charge of downtown, and we had a strong relationship between the cabaret community and the police department and the Department of Liquor and Lottery. And when you have the cabaret owners being part of that public safety team by keeping underage people out, by monitoring over service, by intervening effectively and reasonably in low-level disputes, we have less disturbance, assaults, and crimes of violence spill out in the street as a result. That work hadn't been done for a variety of reasons, primarily staffing over the years, but I knew that was an area that we needed our night shift to focus on, and we are now doing compliance checks not only as Burlington police officers, but we've teamed up with the Department of Liquor and Lottery, and their investigators have been working directly with us to really kind of reorient cabaret owners to their responsibility and the importance of their role in ensuring a safe and vibrant downtown, and I look forward to advancing that work.
Two other questions. I'm not clear how long you're staying around.
So I have a 2-year contract with the city of Burlington, 2-year commission as the interim police chief. So although I serve in a department head role, the permanent police chief position is vacant and unfunded. The administration has a contract with IACP, International Association of Chiefs of Police. The search process is going to begin in the next few weeks. And as I understand it, they hope to post the job in November. And then it usually takes a few months in order to do, initial screenings, initial interviews, final interviews, candidate selection, background, and that kind of thing. So I anticipate that the city will have a permanent police chief in place sometime before July of 26, and then I will stay on the Burlington Police for the remainder of the time as a transition agent, if you will, and help that new chief get acclimated to the city, the organization, and given our human resources at the police department, there's plenty of work. Yeah. So I know I'll have full days and nights ahead until March of 2027.
How hopeful are you about the city of Burlington looking into the future? Do we have to lower our expectations of what? I mean, it's never going to be like it was in 1995 or 2005? What's your view on that open-ended question?
Never say never. I think Burlington's future is bright. I think when the administration comes together with the state and maybe we identify some areas for collaboration, some systems that we can improve as we can build out more of our available human resources at the Burlington Police, I think there's bright days ahead. I'm very optimistic about the development downtown, and particularly in the infrastructure that can support more in-building. And I think Burlington will continue to emerge as the crown jewel city that she is.
That wraps it up for this edition of 802 News, sponsored by Red Hen Baking Company. Thanks to Chief Burke, and thank you for listening.